So we've been exploring the foundation teachings for the last couple of weeks, 3 weeks. Some short recently. We started back at the foundation, and among other things, we looked at four levels of consciousness, and we began our discussion with there's a fundamental mistake that we make of we take the experience of awareness or the experience of knowing, and we turn that into a me. And that happens at a very deep, below the surface level of consciousness, right? And then there are other levels. There's the level of all of the sense consciousnesses, the level of what's happening. That's one level. The level of what's happening in your mind, your thoughts, your feelings, your physical sensations, your body image, like images. That's another level. And then there's a sort of a storehouse level of where all the things you've ever seen and felt and heard, maybe in many, many lifetimes, or if you like, in just this lifetime, where those impressions are held, waiting for the next moment that will call them forward. Right? So we did that because it was useful to think about what builds up this solid sense of me that the foundation level works with. The foundation level of the Buddhist teaching aims at loosening up, dissolving a solid sense of me as real, permanent, forever. I'll go on even after this body dies. Me goes on somewhere, right? So the teachings are aimed at that, at unraveling that as a misunderstanding. And knowing that led me to think about, well, there's the story of the Buddha. And often we can go through a lot of discussion and not remember the story. And I don't want to retell the whole story. And maybe the first thing I can say is I like to say the story of the Buddha. Buddhism is not a religion. I actually think it is a religion, but it's not a religion that's concerned with whether or not something actually happened. Like, was Prince Siddhartha born in the year 480, whatever it was? Did he live in this town? What did he have for breakfast on April 5th, 478? Like, no one cares. Really, it's not a religion about the history. We live in a culture, and it's very important to know that as I go into what I want to share, because we live in a culture that has three religions that dominate the culture, that are all about history: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. All share the same God, different formats, and they can argue among themselves of who's right and who's closer to the truth, and we're not here for that argument. But they all have the assumption that that divine being, wherever it lives, whatever it is, wherever it lives, that it has stepped into human history and altered the course of history. God gave the commandments to Moses. God parted the Red Sea. God saved the Israelites from Egypt. God gave them the land of Canaan. God sent his son Jesus. God spoke to the prophet Muhammad. It's like all moments in history. And Buddhism doesn't care about that. Whatever that, if that happened, if it didn't happen, that's not what we're here to talk about. But there's a difference between saying, okay, now we're talking about the story of this prince, different religion, Buddhism, in northern India, somewhere around the year 500 before the Common Era, BCE. And it's a story. And the story has something to teach you. It doesn't matter if he actually was born in 580 or 540, or there never was a man named Siddhartha. It doesn't matter, because the teaching of the story is still useful. So the story of the Buddha. Right? So I just wanted to get past that kind of historical thing that sometimes people, maybe none of you would get trapped in, but some people get trapped in. And so this prince is born. He's in the story called Siddhartha. and he grows up in a life of privilege and luxury. And then something happens that interrupts the dream of privilege. There is an interruptive moment where the prince sees through the illusion that privilege could go on forever, that happiness would be happy ever after, that all problems would be resolved, you know, and that shakes the ground of the prince's life and ejects him out of the palace that he was living in into seeking enlightenment. So I really just wanted to talk about those provoking moments tonight or today, right? Like what happened? And the essence of the story is something interrupts privilege. Something interrupts the illusion of perpetual happiness. And the insight into things change. Nothing lasts, no thing, including this thing I call me, no thing will last forever. Not even the gods last forever. They may live 100 million years, and eventually they will die. So no thing, no god, no mountain, even the sun will die. There is some interruption of the illusion of permanent happiness. In the story of the Buddha, he leaves the palace. And the way I normally like to tell this story, it's sort of like he's going for a car ride through the capital city of Kapilavastu. He's in a chariot, and he has somebody driving the chariot. He's standing in the chariot, looking around, right? So they're out for the prince is out for a Friday night joyride through town, going down to the burger joint to get a burger, right? This is so much like what happens in many lives. You leave the comfort of your house and you go out, right? And then there's something that penetrates the veil of comfortable permanence. And so in the story of the Buddha, he sees somebody who's sick. And his life has been constructed by his father for many, many reasons to shield him from sickness. And then he sees a corpse. It's like somebody's being, has died, and they're being carried, away from their house to 5th century India. They were probably either being taken to be cremated somewhere or left in the burial grounds, in the charnel grounds. And he's never seen a dead person. Now, it's very interesting to me, I don't know about you, but I know a lot of people who get to be 30 or 40 years old and they've never seen a dead person. And so the reality of death hasn't penetrated. It hasn't shaken the system to go, well, wait a minute, that was Uncle Bob. That was Aunt Mary. That was my friend's father. Or when I was going to school, there was a little kid. I think I was in 2nd or 3rd grade. This kid was in 1st grade. He got run over by a car on the busy street out in front of the school. That was Billy. Right? Something has to penetrate. But we live in a culture that is very death phobic. So even when we do see dead people, they're made to look just like they look alive. They look like they're just asleep. And we shield ourselves from the reality, right? So we shut away sick people. We shut away old people into nursing homes so we don't have to deal with the elderly and the loss of memory and the loss of health. We don't look at dead people. And so I think he sees a sick person, an old person, in another moment, and then he sees a dead, a corpse being carried around, carried out for burial. And then he sees in northern Indian culture in the 5th century before Christ, before the Common Era, the first third of a person's life, and I'm sorry, this is patriarchal, right? The first third of a man's life was learning. The second third, he was the father, the leader, the warrior. If he was the prince, he would become the king, right? He took on over the family business. And in the third, the final third of life, he put aside the concerns of daily life and went to meditate on the meaning of life and became a sannyasin, a journeyer, a seeker, right? And so the fourth interruption for the Buddha is to see this wandering ascetic, this holy man. I said it was patriarchal because I think the women didn't get the benefit of that third. They were expected to take care of everything. They took care of everything in the second third and the third, and they didn't get much recognition or reward, right? And some of the immediate way of Buddhism, the Vajrayana, comes out of when women wanted to go practice, they went to the charnel grounds and met with the practitioners who were there. But that's a story for another day, right? So we're staying inside the confines of the Buddha's story. His life has been interrupted. The comfortable security and illusion of permanence has been interrupted. And that's a moment of positive change. Before the interruption, he was in the golden cage of thinking everything is happy. Everything is just like I want it to be. Everybody is like this. This is life. This is good. And then something interrupts it. And then it's like, oh, there has to be more. If everybody gets old, grows ill, and dies, then what does it mean if I get fill in your desire, the new car, the job, the gift that you've been longing for? If somebody's nice to you today, right? Does that change your entire life? Does that satisfy? Right? Most people will go, it's good. I like to get new things and shiny things and be promoted and be successful and have people like me. That's all good. And it always leaves me wanting more. I want the next new thing, the next nice compliment. And if I want to, have a bigger picture, I have to find out what else is there. And that's what penetrated the Buddha's alertness, his consciousness, his mind, his heart. Right? There has to be something more than the life of the palace. And so we've been looking at how ego works. And ego, that mistaking awareness to be me, and how consciousness builds up this sense of separateness and solidity and continuity, that's the palace. We're trapped in the palace of ego, thinking it's all about me and my happiness. And a moment of positive change is when something interrupts that. It's sort of, there's a spark of difference. And I love the examples that were there. One of them was just seeing the sunflower and the flower arrangement, right? As if for the first time, noticing it, right? A shift inside. A sudden snap of recognition that I've grown, that things are different. Seeing one's own arrogance, like seeing, oh, I said that thing and that was really like not helpful, not considerate. A recognition that the religion you grew up with, and I grew up with that same religion, that recognizing that's not a good description. There's more than that. I mean, it's lovely in its own context, and it's not, that description no longer works for me. Or not being afraid of something you were afraid of before, or the example about making the morning offering of the tea, being stuck in a story of, oh, I'm not doing this anymore, and then like just taking a first step, and it's like, oh yeah, now it's different. I took the step. Something interrupts the pattern of stuckness and of belief in a solid me. And that's the point in the Buddha's story that I wanted to focus on. And the reason I'm focusing on that is if you take refuge in the Buddha, and I like to think of, refuge has multiple meanings here. It's like finding your confidence, that the Buddha is a good example of what it is like to awaken your heart and your mind. So finding confidence in the Buddha. But also, it does have that meaning of safety, of in the ocean of suffering, his example is like a raft that you can climb onto so you don't drown in the suffering. It offers a paradigm, a pattern, something that you can work with. And I began to go, oh, yeah. He had that snapshot of change, of positive change. And then I asked at the very beginning, what's your snapshot of a positive change? And you all had one, which was quite wonderful, because it's sort of a startling question. And then if you think about, well, the moment you decided that you wanted more, that just going shopping and finding what you wanted, just having enough money in your bank account that suited you, just having the right house or the right relation, like the relationship you wanted, boyfriend, girlfriend, parents, kids, neighbors, whatever, just having the palace wasn't enough. And there's something that interrupts, and the result is the realization internally there must be more. That moment where you have that interruption and recognition is very precious. And so what I'd really invite you to think about, if something doesn't come up for you that's very clear, is think about, when was that for you? And if you haven't had it happen, then what would have to happen? Just think about what might happen to help it happen. Right? But if you are a Buddhist and you've taken refuge or you've decided you're a Buddhist, something had to happen to interrupt the complacency of thinking that you would live forever, that me was real, and whatever way you were looking at the world, whether it was one of the three Western religions or just happy materialism, the American, Canadian, suburban consumer dream. Something had to interrupt that. For many of us, and I'm headed towards the end of this, contemplation, you start becoming a Buddhist a long time before you formally declare that you're one. So I think it took me 12 or 13 years. It took a long time of me sitting and practicing meditation, like Zen meditation, and reading Dharma books. And then at some point, I recognized, oh, this is it. And I can actually remember the moment, a sudden recognition that all those things that I had been taught about the safety of an external God and how my world was organized, that wasn't good enough anymore. There was something else that I needed, and then it took another 3 years to formally become a Buddhist. I think I was a Buddhist at that moment where there was that sudden snapshot of change. I'd become a Buddhist in my heart. And then it was 2 or 3 years later that I was at a ceremony where you're formally, welcomed into the Buddhist community. But that snapshot moment is for me the most essential moment. Later, when they do a ceremony and maybe they give you a name, maybe they don't give you a name, that only means something if you had the snapshot. If we lived in a Buddhist culture and we forced every 15-year-old girl and boy to be a Buddhist, it wouldn't work. Because without the snapshot of change, without that moment of change, it doesn't mean anything. And so here we are, at whatever age we are. We're all older than 15 or 16. Looking back for you at what was that moment in which you made the shift and you went, there's something more. Right? That's the Buddha leaving the palace, encountering the old man, the sick man, the dead man, and the wandering meditator, the ascetic. So that's the remarks I had to share for today. I'd be very interested in hearing if that sparked anything for you. or anything else you'd like to talk about. I'm going to pause the recording